Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Schmidt, and I lead the member impact team here at Pledge 1%. And I'm so excited to welcome you to empower your employees through civic engagement. As many of you know, Pledge 1% is a global movement that inspires, educates, and empowers every company to leverage its assets to be a force for good. If you're new here or just learning about Pledge 1%, I encourage you to go to pledge1percent.org to learn more. So this webinar is actually the first in a new series of webinars we're rolling out called our Igniting Impact series. Say that fast 40 times, which is a series of dynamic 30-minute webinars intended to inspire, guide, and provide actionable insights to meet your company's pledge for good. So keep an eye out for more Igniting Impact events coming in January 2024. So before I introduce our speakers for today, just a few notes about the call. One, everyone on the call except for the presenters are going to be muted today. So please put any questions into the chat and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. You can also follow up with any questions in the Pledge 1% community. And we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone who registers. So again, feel free to use the chat and we will do our best to respond. My colleague Catherine is here and monitoring the chat, so reach out if you need anything. So why are we talking about civic engagement today? In our post-COVID world, employee well-being is no longer considered an optional perk, but really an essential component of a successful and sustainable business strategy. And, companies that invest in their employees' well-being are typically better positioned to thrive in this sort of evolving landscape of work. Many companies have long recognized the benefits of prioritizing employee well-being, including its positive impact on productivity, retention, and overall organizational success. And volunteering, and in particular civic engagement, has been shown to give employees a greater sense of purpose and power, especially during these somewhat turbulent times. So as you think about your volunteering programs for next year, during what can be an anxiety-filled presidential election year, enabling civic engagement is a great way to help support your employees' well-being. So when we think about creating programs to enable civic engagement, we often default to voting because it's nonpartisan, but there are other meaningful nonpartisan activities that can engage employees. And today we're going to hear from one nonprofit organization that provides numerous avenues for employees to actively participate, and in doing so, discover a deeper sense of empowerment. So to talk to us more about these opportunities, I'm excited to welcome Brian Boyle, Executive Director and General Counsel of American Promise, and Dr. Marie Henselder-Kimmel, who is the Volunteer State Coordinator of American Promise. So Brian, I'm going to let you take it away.
Great. Good morning. Thank you so much, Alicia, and thank you to Pledge 1% for just giving us the chance to share a little bit about the work we do. Let me just start off, though, and say, to echo what you mentioned about just the sense of empowerment that can come from civic involvement. Research shows that when somebody's able to connect their daily activities with a broader purpose that serves their community, it actually does reinforce a sense of personal well-being, and it can really give you even more energy to succeed in the things that you're trying to do at work. And so what I would like to do is just share a little bit about how American Promise approaches our current American situation and how we're empowering folks across the country to get involved in their local community. I like to start, though, by the fundamentals to kind of ground people in what it is that we are doing. And so on the next slide, you can see fundamentally America, the country, is based on this idea that the people are going to be the source of legitimate authority in our country. This idea of self-government was what made America a unique country in history. And when the founders were framing our Constitution, they understood, okay, listen, America is going to stretch from coast to coast. There's going to be tons of people throughout this country. How do we make self-government, government by the people, real? And the way that they did that was through what Madison called the scheme of representation, where you have constituents on the one side and representatives on the other. And that relationship was intended to be healthy so that the views and preferences of the people would be reflected in the policy that governed them, which would be passed by their representatives. So if you go to the next slide, when you think about, okay, well, who's in that constituent side of the equation? It's people like me and you. It's also business leaders, civic associations, other local leaders. And then in America today, there's also a relatively small number of people that are constituents and also happen to be donors to a political campaign. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see, well, in modern day America, we also have a whole other side of the equation. So, outside of that representative relationship, there are non-constituent donors and there are independent groups like super PACs that are spending tremendous amounts of money trying to influence what policies are on the agenda of people that are running for office or that are in office. Next slide, please. So you have a situation where that representative is getting a ton of pressure from outside of the constituency, and it's really undermining the relationship that's supposed to be so crucial here, which is the relationship between them and the people they represent. And now I just want to preview that what's happened is that the Supreme Court has made this a national problem because they have said, as a matter of constitutional law, that all of that influence and access that donors and big spenders are getting, that's not corruption. There's nothing we can do about it. And on the next slide, I do want to get a little bit into, the bad news that results from that series of decisions that the Supreme Court has made. So the next few slides are going to show you some results from a Pew Research report that just came out in September. And what you'll see is people feel exhausted and angry when they think about politics. On the next slide, please, you can see there, when you ask them, what do you think of to describe US politics? Corrupt, divisive, messy, polarized. They think that the actual issues that matter are getting very little attention, and things like disagreements between parties are getting too much attention. On the next slide, you'll see that the role that money is playing in our politics, the American people feel it's preventing good people from getting involved. It's making it so that only special interest groups really have the power, and theirs are the only voices that are being heard in the system. And if you continue on to the next slide, this is showing up where people in their districts feel like we're being ignored, we're being forgotten because the money is calling the tune here. And that is a sentiment that is shared across the political ideological spectrum. There's really no difference if you're talking to independents, Republicans, Democrats. You ask them, do you think there should be limits, some way to get a handle on all this money in politics? And they all say, yes, absolutely, because it's interfering with our voice. And on the next slide, you'll see there's some generational tracking that shows over time, people just continue to feel that their public officials don't care what actual ordinary Americans think because they're so concerned about the money. Next slide, please. Okay, so enough of that bad news. The good news is that there's actually really concrete things that every American, regardless of party or partisanship, can get involved with to have their voices heard. And what we at American Promise are doing is we're working on a constitutional amendment that would allow the states and Congress to get a handle on the out of control money in our political system. And on the next slide, really what this is fundamentally about is realigning that relationship so that representatives can hear what their constituents care about and can be responsive to those desires and not feel like they're beholden to spending, hours and hours a day dialing for dollars. Instead, they could spend that time in community meeting with the folks that they're supposed to represent. Next slide, please. So we call it the For Our Freedom Amendment. And on the next slide, you'll see that it's a relatively short amount of text. It can fit on a napkin, and we'll be happy to provide a link in case people want to just take a closer look in their spare time. But the idea with this constitutional language is to say, listen, the Supreme Court got it wrong when they said that we couldn't try to regulate the money in our campaigns and elections. We, the people, want to make it so that Congress and the states can address this problem. And let me just take a step back and say, Congress and the states have tried multiple times to do different things to get a handle on this problem. And over, a divided Supreme Court has struck those measures down. So this constitutional amendment would say, listen, we, the American people, we think you got it wrong. And so we're going to get it right. Next slide, please. And just in terms of getting a sense of the support for this amendment, we've got supermajorities throughout the country that are supportive, because I think people just recognize that it actually is about giving them better control over what's supposed to be self-government. On the next slide, you'll see that when we ask just a simple question, do you agree with the Supreme Court that individuals and entities should be able to spend unlimited amounts of money? Of course they don't agree. 74% disagree that that should be the case. And on the last slide, when you ask people, do you agree that money in politics is a threat to our democracy? It's almost 90% say yes. Again, they can connect the dots in a common sense way. Next slide, please. And then this I like to show just because it shows that there is really very little variation across partisanship or ideology, right? So you've got Democrats, Independents, Republicans, all supermajorities saying that they're on the same page about this. Next slide, please. All right, so we've actually made considerable progress towards getting this amendment to become part of the Constitution. I'm a lawyer by training, so I won't bore you with the details, but the Constitution does set out a process for how you amend it. We've done it 27 times in the past, and really there's two steps. There's proposal of the amendment and then ratification. And what we're doing is we are working in states to build support, really to convert the existing grassroots support into mobilized support within their state, where folks ask their state legislatures to pass a non-binding resolution across party lines, which says, listen, we're ready for this amendment. Please, Congress, will you propose it so that we can ratify? So 22 states have already done that. Ultimately, for ratification, we need to have 38 that get on board. And next slide, please. So as we transition over into ways that folks can get involved and pitch in, I'm going to invite Dr. Marie Henselder-Kimmel to get involved, but I do just want to start with one specific action, which doesn't have anything to do with American Promise specifically. On the next slide, it's just simply to invite people that in 2024, you should consider contacting your local election office to sign up to be an election worker. Separate and apart from what American Promise do, it's important for every citizen to sort of show up and be part of the process, because it really does build trust in not only the process locally, but those outcomes locally. You walk to a polling place and you see your neighbors are there working at the polls to make sure that everything's run, all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. It does build Americans' confidence in the outcomes of our elections. So I would encourage you to do that by contacting your local either town clerk or secretary of state's office in your state and say, I volunteer. And with that, I will turn things over to Marie.
Thanks for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are across the nation. I just wanted to expand a little bit on one thing that Brian said. I've been working at this for 7 years as a volunteer. And the thing that brought me to this idea of getting money out of politics is I was really concerned as a physician with how many times policy decisions were made in favor of health insurers or pharmaceutical companies and not in favor of my patients. And I knew that there was something going on there, but I didn't quite understand what it was. And as I retired and I did a little bit more investigation, I realized it's the money. It's the money and the influence that the money gives these special interests and these wealthy individuals. So amendments to the U.S. Constitution are a big lift. And many times when we talk to volunteers or we talk to people at tabling events or what have you, they say, well, yeah, we need to do that, but good luck with that. Well, the good news is that, as Brian showed, 75% of Americans believe that this needs to be done. And it's a rare situation for a constitutional amendment to start with that kind of supermajority support. So we already have the support among the people. We just have to build the political will to get it done. We offer Here, we're going to offer a few different options that you can offer your employees to get involved. And they require various amounts of time, because we certainly understand, and I do, especially working with volunteers, that some people have a little bit of time to commit, some people have more time to commit. So one thing that people can start is to help to get more supporters signed up by signing the American Promise Citizen Pledge. And this is the wording of it. And it just simply says that I join the majority of Americans that say we need to end the domination of big money and give voice back to the people, so we're not drowned out by the special interests and the wealthy. And that I'll commit without regard to party or other differences, and urge candidates and elected officials to do the same. Because as Brian said, we do need this to go through our local legislatures, to go to the Congress, and come back to the states for ratification. In addition to an individual signing themselves, they can talk a little bit to their friends and family and say, hey, I just signed on to this pledge. Why don't you think about doing it? This is helpful to us, even if you don't take any other step, because then we can take these locations of these volunteers to say to legislators, look, we have this many supporters in your area. You really need to think about doing this. So it helps us, even if you don't take one more step. We hope you do, but even if you don't take one more step. Can I have the next slide, please? A next step is writing letters to the editor. Basically, the three functions that a letter to the editor serves is to educate the public about the fact that there is an ongoing and a movement to get this amendment done, the 4R Freedom Amendment, and it's building momentum. It alerts the editor to newsworthiness of the issue. And believe it or not, all legislators monitor what goes into the papers, especially opinion pieces and letters to the editor, because it gives them an insight into what their constituents are thinking about and what they want to see done. Actually, I lead the monthly writing team call, where I focus on different aspects about money and politics to write about in your local area. Sometimes we do some national-based things, like in September is the anniversary of the ratification of the Constitution. And we did a nationwide effort to try to get some op-eds and letters to the editor, as many as we could, published, so people can join in that. Or they can just simply take our resources and decide, this bugs me. I'm going to write a letter to my paper about it. That all helps. And people certainly can join the writing team. And then our third, actually a very big initiative that's coming up, because 2024 is a big election year, as we all know, that we can ask candidates, whether they're municipal, state, or federal, for Congress, or for even the presidency, where do you stand on fixing the problem in our constitutional republic, to make it so that money doesn't have such power in deciding policies and overwhelming the voices of the people. Excuse me. Just want to say that we need to build a political will, and getting this conversation, getting this amendment into the discourse of elections for this 2024 year is going to be very impactful. So the more voices we can get out there, the more candidates we can bring in, and then once we give you the guidelines to contact, individuals can do this. You can then have them sign, send it back to us. We highlight it. We amplify these. We don't make endorsements because we're nonpartisan, but we do amplify that, these candidates are focused on this and they support this. And you should think about whether you support it, and if you want to support a candidate that does support getting money out of politics. All right. So we do provide training with templates, and you can certainly join our trainings. They're going to be coming up in the next couple of months to work on this candidate pledge. I just want to say one other thing, that in working with volunteers, and honestly myself, people, as they step, and this doesn't just relate to the constitutional amendment work that I do or that we do, but it also relates to other civic engagement. When people decide to volunteer and they put a little effort in and they do something that they feel a little bit maybe uncomfortable with doing at first, but they push themselves and they say, you know what, I'm going to follow through on that. There's a huge eureka moment that comes to people. I've seen it many, many times when people do something that they didn't think they really could do, like, oh, I can't do that. They take it on, they follow through, and it's very empowering personally, and for the group. If it's in a group, the whole group really feeds off of that inspiration. So I just want to put that out there as something that your employees could definitely take advantage of personally, that rewarding feeling of making an effort that's good for the whole republic.
And let me just add one thing specifically about LTEs. Marie does such a great job training folks, and there really is something quite powerful about writing one of those and then seeing your letter to the editor published in your community newspaper. It's maybe a little bit old-fashioned the way that ideas were spread and discussed and debated, early on, but it's really impactful to have your voice recognized in that way. So I would encourage folks to consider that as an option, really, on any issues that they care about.
So thank you, Brian and Marie. I will just mention here that we are going to be compiling a resource for everybody on bipartisan civic engagement activities that you can share with your employees. So it'll be a living resource. We'll be adding things to it over time, but that will exist in the Pledge 1% community, and we will add the American Promise resources there as well. So look for that coming soon in the Pledge 1% community. Again, as we enter into this kind of election year here in the United States, we will add and continue to grow that resource over the next few months. So I want to go ahead and open it up for questions at this point. If you have questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat. I have a couple questions, so I'm going to start off with one of mine while we wait and see if there's folks who have other questions. Again, please go ahead and put them into the chat. So Brian, I'm curious, we talked about this being kind of a nonpartisan activity. I'm curious if you guys have strategies that you employ to kind of encourage active participation without exacerbating what is, a time of great political polarization. So how do you manage this kind of moment of political polarization with this nonpartisan kind of activity?
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. That's a great question. And I think that the strategy that we use is probably one that folks could adopt in a range of circumstances. And it's really to first start by focusing on what do we think the fundamental common ground is that unites us. And we live in a country, I can say I feel personally blessed to live in a country that I think does have some basic shared values that resonate across the board with people on a human level. So for example, this idea of the fundamental dignity of every person is a pretty shared value in America. The idea of equality, that your worth as a person doesn't depend on what's in your bank account. That's another shared value. So if you first focus on those shared values that unite you, they unite us as Americans, and then we agree that we are going to respect one another as individuals and set aside any specific differences we may have about specific policies, and you just focus again on what unites you, then you can actually make some real progress on areas where there may be shared objectives. And, maybe this sounds a little bit corny, but you have to just keep bringing this spirit of love and openness to every interaction you have. Because what I've found in this work is, we're told that we're very divided and that we have nothing in common. But when you're out there, and I'm sure Marie can speak to this too, when you are out there at a fair and a festival and you're talking with people that run the gamut, background-wise, political affiliation-wise, you find that everybody has a story that's worth hearing. You find that there's an ability to connect with basically everybody that you meet. And the work that we do here at American Promise is all about finding those points of connection and building upon them, because when people get together and they foster those natural connections, you can really achieve some great things. Marie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about your experience.
The only thing, I agree with everything you said, Brian. I mean, we need to get an amendment passed. You have to have a supermajority in the Congress, and then you need a supermajority of states. And we're not, we are a country that is across we have political spectrum of beliefs. So we all have to come together on this. And I have had conversations with people 180 degrees from my political views. And we've had great conversations about how this money is just stopping anybody in government from hearing what the people want. The other thing I'll point out, just as a point, most people absolutely hate what some people call it silly season, the crazy negative attack ads. That's all dark money. That's all big money fueling those. You can tell if it doesn't say, I'm candidate Jane Smith and I approve this message, it didn't come from the candidate. Other people are putting money into that conversation and taking over the conversation. And this will get rid of that. So
great.
It'll help polarization.
Well, I love the idea of actually being able to have the conversation. That's in this day and age, that's huge. I'm curious, Marie, what do you think drives individuals to volunteer for American Promise?
I can tell you that it's an interesting, my decision, I had several different areas that I was very concerned about, but I saw that the money was under all of it. So I made a decision. Being a physician, I look for the, for the causative factor. And to me, the causative factor is the money, because it undermines all of the good policy that people really do agree upon in common sense ways that can't get done because the money, the people who have the money are driving the decisions. So I have seen many, many people come in who had a concern about maybe they were trying to work on gun violence reform, or they were trying to work on, drug price reform, but they saw that they couldn't get anything done because if they got a policy with a fair amount of support, all of a sudden it died because that entity, that was going to benefit from it not being done came in and spent money and made campaign donations or lobbied or what have you. So we have quite a few people that come from other areas of interest. And we just have people where the message resonates with them, that they're just tired of it. They just want to see our government come back to reflecting what we as the general populace really need to have done for us and what we want to have done.
Great, thank you. And we do have a question from Stephanie. She's curious to hear from the panelists on how to build consensus and support for corporate giving to nonprofits focused on civic engagement and active democracy. This sounds like it's right up your alley, Brian. She said, our company's focus areas are STEM education, climate, and life sciences as they are aligned with our business objectives. How do you get executives on board with supporting this necessary work when it can be tricky to navigate or when they don't see the urgency and importance as they're focused on global initiatives and issues?
That's a
tough one.
It's an outstanding question. I want to just hit on 2 points. The first is that I think it's really helpful to remind executives that undergirding all of the great progress that we can see in tech or life sciences or any other area that your business may be focused on is a fundamental respect for the rule of law, right? I mean, the existence and long life of the rule of law in the United States is one of the things that made us a global leader. And issues related to democracy right now really do go to, are we going to continue to be a country where the rule of law predominates? And that's why it's important to have confidence in the results of our elections. It's important to have confidence in the idea that your representative is actually representing their constituents. It all goes to making sure that the rule of law continues to be maintained here in America. So I would start with that substantive point, and then, it's always just good to invite them to have a call with somebody, either from like nonprofit, American Promise, for example, or another nonprofit working in this area where we can kind of get into the details and connect the dots for them. But I would just first start with that fundamental point of reminding them that nothing else is possible in America if we don't have the rule of law and self-government. Great,
thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are at time. Stephanie, I would say it's also a great question to ask in the Pledge 1% community, where we can get some Pledge 1% members to join in. And maybe I will go over there and ask that question for you and get that conversation started over in the community. I want to thank you, Brian and Marie, again. Really appreciate your being here and sort of letting us know about these other options for nonpartisan political engagement. Again, we're going to be building that resource here at Pledge 1% so that we can help our companies more easily engage their volunteers and their employees in these volunteer opportunities. So thank you again, and I hope to see you all in the Pledge 1% community. Thank you all.
Have a great day.
Take care.